Present. Okay. So day 2 of the Renaissance, we are spending our time today focusing on the 4 Ninja Turtles of the Renaissance: Donatello, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael. So starting off with Donatello, you see his actual face and his Ninja Turtle face. So his biography, he was born around 1386 in Florence, Italy, so he is on the earlier end of the Renaissance. He was the important figure in the early Italian Renaissance. He originally studied as a goldsmith as well as an artist. He reintroduced bronze as a major medium in Western art, and this was used prominently before in ancient Rome, but had not been used since. So he is the main user of bronze. So you can see here are some of his more famous works. He created art in the 1440s and influenced by ancient sculpture. So he did the first unsupported standing bronze sculpture of the Renaissance, which is the statue of David that we see over here. It's also the first freestanding nude since ancient times. So he kind of brought a lot of things back. This is the true emphasis on classicism that ancient Greek and Rome influence. This is the most youthful depiction of David in comparisons to Michelangelo's, which we'll see again later. But it does use that contrapposto, that weight shift. So you can see that he is not just standing up straight. He has got a shift where most of his weight is on that back foot. Leonardo da Vinci in real life and the Ninja Turtle version. He was born in 1452 in Vinci, Italy, so his name literally means Leonardo from Vinci. By age 14, he was already apprenticing under the artist Verrocchio. He developed the technique of sfumato, that smoky blending between light and dark, that gradual transition. He did that. He has painted the 2 most famous paintings of all time, The Last Supper and the Mona Lisa. So The Last Supper, he is not the first person to paint The Last Supper, and he wasn't the last, but his depiction has become the most well-known. The early Renaissance compositions reveal the apostle sitting all the way around a table. Mid-15th century versions show Judas is the only person on the viewer side of the table, and then on Leonardo's side, they are all on that same side of the table. So here we can see it. So they're all seated together on the same side of that table. So it's located on a wall in the mess hall of the Santa Maria della Grazia in Milan, Italy. So it's not in a museum anywhere because it was literally painted on a wall. Since Da Vinci used oil paint and not fresco, as soon as it dried, it began deteriorating immediately. So this church, Historical Society, spend lots of money trying to keep this painting from deteriorating completely. You can see it's kind of over the door. So what characteristics of Renaissance art do we notice? We have that geometrical arrangement of shapes, with the most important figure being at the head of the triangle. So that is Jesus Christ right there in the middle. He is also the center of the vanishing point. So all things recede in the background behind his head. So we see perspective with the vanishing point. We see a geometric arrangement of shapes. We also have the geometric shapes all the way around the background and the side of the walls. So where is Judas? Judas, of course, being the apostle that betrayed Jesus Christ at the Last Supper, gave him away to the people that would eventually crucify him. So see if you can take a look at the figures. Where is Judas? Which one is he? He's right there. So he is the only disciple whose face is cast in dark shadow, even though he should not be in shadow, based on where the light is. His features are demonic looking with a hooked nose and heavy brow. He's also clutching his money bag. So you can see right here, he's clutching money, and he is also reaching for food before the food has been blessed. You can see he's very dark, where even the people behind him are much lighter, not in the shadow. So the Mona Lisa, also by Leonardo da Vinci, is currently housed in the Louvre Museum in Paris, behind several inches of bulletproof glass, because it has been shot at before. It has been stolen several times, so they take it very seriously. Mona is just the Italian word for lady, so it's just Lady Lisa. The woman in the portrait is Lisa di Anton Maria Gherardini, and she was the wife of a textile merchant. So this is just a wealthier family that paid Leonardo to paint this portrait. We see chiaroscuro and sfumato are evident in the technique, so we see that sharp contrast between light and dark with the chiaroscuro, and we see a gradual blending with the sfumato. However, she never received the painting, as he took it with him when he moved to France, and then it remained there when he died. So that's why the painting is currently in France, even though it was painted by an Italian for an Italian. The Italians are still real mad at France for never giving that painting back. So there it is, the famous Mona Lisa. So we see that dramatic contrast between light and dark with her skin and the gown. We see a gradual blending between her dress and the background. So there you can see it's always got a crowd of people. If you ever go to the Louvre, you can always tell where the Mona Lisa is because it's where the line is. You can see this is oil paint. It's got that cracking skin. That sly smile that she's famous for, and those eyes that people claim follow you no matter where you go. All right, so Leonardo da Vinci, why is he called a Renaissance man? So the notion of Renaissance man means genius. It's often associated with him because he was not only an artist, but an engineer, an architect, a botanist, a physiologist, and a linguist. He did all kinds of stuff. He wrote backwards in his journals and sketchbooks in mirror image, so no one would be able to read it. They would see it and they think it was code, but he is just writing backwards. So instead of writing from left to right, he writes in mirror image from right to left, flipping his letters over backwards. So this right here is his signature. So Leonardo da Vinci, and then he would write it like this, going the opposite way. We're going to look at some images from his sketchbooks. Now, what is really cool, mind-boggling really, about these sketches is how much they are worth today. If you were to have his entire collection of sketches, it would be worth billions of dollars. Billions of dollars. So you can see them backwards mirror writing here, where he writes starting from the right over to the left. So he was fascinated with human anatomy, so he would perform autopsies on dead bodies to be able to figure out how the human body works. So this is, of course, the human heart. What he thought the skeletal and cardiovascular system looked like. Muscular system, bones, with his notes on how he thought everything worked. So obviously he could never cut an alive pregnant woman apart. So this is what he theorized happened inside a pregnant body. He thought it was basically like an eggshell that kind of hatched inside your body. So was he a genius? Yes. Did he get everything right? No. So again, muscular and skeletal systems, trying to figure out how everything worked. This is the Vitruvian Man. And then he also designed lots of new technology for the time. So this is an original design for a crossbow in the 1400s. Catapult, like a huge crossbow, basically. Cannonball. So he was designing things that did not exist yet, living in the future. This is a tank for a horse-drawn carriage. This is another catapult. This is actually an early design for a gun. Shields. This is sort of like for harvesting crops. Then he also was fascinated with botany, so he would sketch flowers. All right, moving on to Michelangelo Buonarroti. He was born in 1475 in Caprese, which was then part of Florence. It's currently part of the Tuscany region of Italy. His mother died when he was young, so he moved in with a stone cutter, which is where he learned the basic techniques for carving and shaping stone. Huge influence on his later life. His biggest patrons, so the people that paid for him to work, were Lorenzo de' Medici, again, that big Medici family, and then Pope Julius II. His dominant influences were Catholicism and politics, mostly because he was paid to make work by the Catholic Church, by the Pope, and Lorenzo de' Medici, a politician. His most common mediums were marble for sculpture and fresco for painting. His most famous quote is that every block of stone has a statue inside of it, and it is the job of the sculptor to discover it. His first famous work was called the Pietà. It was at the age of 20. He was commissioned to make the Pietà, which is a sculpture of the Virgin Mary holding the body of Jesus. The contract for the sculpture read that master sculptor Michelangelo would create one Pietà. The word master is extremely significant because even though he was only 20, he was already considered a master sculptor. So here's the Pietà. So what characteristics of the Renaissance do we see here? We see the We see that triangular formation here. So we have that geometric arrangement of shapes. We have a realistic portrayal. It is very uncommon for people to portray Jesus in this fragile manner because they always portrayed him as, like after he came off the cross, as a very successful, powerful, omnipotent being. And here he is lying dead. So it's very uncommon to portray that aspect of him because they didn't want to show him as weak in any way. We see the facial expressions on both of them, very realistic human anatomy here, lots of Renaissance features. And close-ups on their faces, you can see the detail is extraordinary. So I want you to think about, this is not clay that he's formed and you're able to just kind of push and carve. This is marble. So it's a hard stone. So in order to be able to carve this, you have to use a pick and a hammer and then sand it to get it smooth. This is extremely difficult to do, and he's managed to get these very fine details into these facial features. It's extraordinary. So his big famous statue is called David. We saw it before yesterday. We're going to take a look of it in detail today. So it took 3 years for him to complete this statue. So again, it's made out of marble, and it is 16 foot tall. It's currently housed in the Academy Gallery in Florence, Italy. So it's 16 feet tall. So about here is where your head would reach if you were standing next to it. So we see lots of classical Renaissance features here. So who is David? Why are people sculpting him so much? So this is the story of David from the Bible, David versus Goliath. This sculpture is symbolic of Florence in relation to the rest of the city-state. So it's, the tiny little farmer versus the big giant. Nobody thought he could win, but he beats him anyway. So it's talking about how it's not just the strength of a larger body, but it can be intellect that can win out. So he represents the strength of small Florence against the larger surrounding city-states in Italy. So there it is with people standing next to it. Okay, so the statue itself is 16 feet, and then it's housed on this big block, so nobody can touch it. From the side, so you can see all of the detail in the muscles, in the ribs, and then his facial expression. Again, think about, this is not clay that you can easily bend with your fingers or with a knife. This is marble. It is a hard stone that you have to chisel away with a hammer. His hand is actually quite significant because this right hand is much larger than his left proportionately, and this was done on purpose, just because that was the hand that he threw that he used with the slingshot against David or against Goliath. So it was represented as much larger to show the power of that hand. All right, so what characteristics of Renaissance art do we see in this sculpture? We have the Greek influence, right? He looks kind of Greek with that curly hair and the facial features, again, just because the marble hadn't been used in so long. He is muscular and fit and lean, proportionate and godlike. We have, because the body was seen as that sacred temple, so showing it as idealistic to show God's gift to the people. We have the contrapposto, which is the Italian word for weight shift, where we see he is not just standing straight, he is shifted naturally where his weight is kind of on that back hip. Okay, so it's not evenly divided. It's not symmetrical. So we see the left, this side right here is his passive side. There's no weight on his left side. And then the right, we have where all of the weight is there, and that is where he'll throw from. So the right is active. So there's potential for movement from his stance. He could shift his weight. He is looking to the left, which is where Goliath is. The word for left in Italian is sinistra, which is also the word for evil. So anything to the left in paintings or in sculpture is typically seen as the evil side. All right, so let's compare here. We have Donatello's statue of David from the 15th century, and then we have Michelangelo's statue of David from the 16th century. So early Renaissance to high Renaissance. You can see the differences obviously in medium. Donatello is in bronze. Michelangelo is in marble. There's also a big size difference. Donatello is 6 feet tall. Michelangelo is 16 feet tall. And then the difference in the actual portrayal of the body. Okay, so we see more defined anatomical features here. He looks older, he looks more powerful, and he doesn't have a sword and helmet. All right, next big thing for Michelangelo is the Sistine Chapel. So he worked on this fresco on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel from 1508 to 1512. 4 years he worked on this. It was commissioned by Pope Julius II and depicted only biblical scenes. So here's from the back of the Sistine Chapel. So you can see every bit of the wall and ceiling he has covered with fresco. And the main goal behind this was not everybody at the time was literate. So the churches all wanted to have stained glass windows or paintings that depicted stories of the Bible for people to learn from, even if they couldn't read the stories of the Bible themselves. So they were able to still know the stories without being literate. So there are 343 figures just on the ceiling. That's one figure every 4 days. So I know it seems like 4 years is such a long time to work, but that is him completing one figure every 4 days. That is for looking underneath it. And so here's kind of just a map where you can see these stories and the characters that are represented in each of these. So you might recognize some of these names. In the middle of the ceiling is the creation story. So we have God creating Eve and God creating Adam. They're tempted from the garden. We move on to Noah, creates the planets and the sun, divides light from dark. All over here, we have Jonah, Jeremiah, all of these things, all of these different stories and characters from the Bible. Okay, so here are some up close. This is the flood. All right, so on this back wall, so we go all the way through the ceiling, and then down here on the back wall is the painting called The Last Judgment. We'll get back to that in a minute. All right, the creation of man. So this is one of the most famous depictions of God and Adam ever. This is why this painting right here is why when people tend to represent God, they represent him as an old man. This is one of the first paintings ever of God. So this is what people tend to imagine because this is the way Michelangelo made him. This finger hand. So this is where God touched Adam and brought him to life. This is commonly recreated in a lot of things. It's a meme going around the internet if you've seen that, where you just kind of like reach your hand out and touch something and bring it to life. Then we have the creation of Eve. So you see Adam is unconscious. God has taken his rib, and from that rib he has created Eve and brought her to life. The creation of the heavens. So we see the angels behind him. He is creating, that's the sun and the moon. This is the fall from grace. So this is the serpent here tempting Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. And then they are cast out from heaven by the archangel. So you can see the pained expressions on their faces. They look much more demonic in this painting once they are expelled from the garden than when they are created. All right, the Last Judgment on the back wall. So the Last Judgment is like the final judgment. So this is where God here is judging the people who have died, and you either rise up and you are granted permission to go into heaven, to enter heaven, or you are deemed unworthy and you are melted down to hell. And when I say melted, I mean that quite literally. So you can zoom in. Here's a zoom in cross section of the painting where you can see once you've been deemed unworthy, you've been deemed evil, not worthy of heaven, then they portray you melting down below. All right, Raphael, our last guy. So Raphael was born in 1483 in Urbino. It's on the northeast coast of the Italian peninsula. His father was also a painter, so he had the artistic influence in his home from an early age. However, his mother died when he was 8, and his father died when he was 11. So he's now an orphan, but his paternal uncle and stepmother wanted to raise him. So he still grew up with a family. So he created several rooms. The School of Athens is his most famous work. So Athens, obviously a city-state in Greece. So we see here the influence of ancient Greece and Rome. Depicts many of the great minds of history existing in the same space. So we see all of these are scholars further out history, and he also hid portraits of himself and contemporaries in the painting. So he depicts Leonardo da Vinci here as Plato, and then we see Michelangelo as Heraclitus hidden in the painting. stuff. All right, those are our 4 Ninja Turtles of the Renaissance.